Let me tell you a story that has been playing out in living rooms, at kitchen tables, and in group chats all over America. It starts the same way almost every time. A family buys a home. They breathe that first deep breath standing in the doorway because it finally feels real. They take the photo in front of the sold sign. They point at corners of empty rooms and say things like, "This will be the kids' room, this will be the office, this is where the couch goes." They imagine birthday parties in the backyard that does not even have grass yet. They talk about paint colors. They talk about finally getting a dog. And for a while, it feels like the story is heading toward peace. Then one day, a letter arrives. Not a love letter. Not a congratulations letter. Not a welcome to the neighborhood letter. A bill. A property tax bill that is so much higher than the year before, it makes you stare at it like you are reading someone else's mail. Except it is your name, your address, your house. It is real, it is due, and it does not care what you think about it. Now here is where the story splits into two versions. In one version, the homeowner finds a way to make it work. They cut back quietly. They skip the vacation. They delay the repairs. They stop eating out. They do the math over and over, like it will change if they look hard enough. In the other version, the homeowner starts asking a question that sounds simple at first, almost innocent. Why am I paying this much every year, forever, just to stay in a home I already bought? And once that question shows up in your mind, it does not leave, because it leads to the bigger one. Do you really own your home if you have to keep paying the government year after year just to remain there? That feeling, that little knot in your stomach when the bill climbs while your paycheck does not, is the emotional spark behind a headline that keeps popping up more and more. Eliminate property taxes. Bring them down to zero. When you hear that, part of you wants to cheer. Another part of you immediately thinks, wait, what? Are states actually proposing this? And if property taxes disappear, what happens to the services those taxes pay for? Schools, police, fire, roads, libraries, parks, storm drains, street lights. The unglamorous stuff that keeps your town from falling apart. Today we are going to walk through this like an investigation, like a road trip, like a story. We are going to visit the places where this idea has been floated and pushed. We are going to talk about what people mean when they say eliminate, because the fine print matters more than the headline. We are going to face the funding question that shows up 5 seconds after the cheering. And we are going to talk about the angles people forget, the ones that hit you hardest depending on whether you are a homeowner, a renter, a first-time buyer, a retiree, or someone who just wants the rules to feel fair. This is not about picking a team. This is about understanding what is happening, why it is happening, and what could come next. So grab your coffee, your water, whatever you have nearby, because this is where it gets real. I want you to meet Maria. Maria is not a politician. She is not a lobbyist. She is not sitting on a finance committee. She is just a homeowner, the kind of person who did what everyone tells you to do if you want a stable life. She worked, she saved, she bought a place, and she thought she was finally stepping onto solid ground. A few years ago, Maria bought a modest home in a place she genuinely loved. Not a mansion, not a waterfront palace, just a normal home on a normal street. The kind of place where you can picture kids riding bikes and neighbors walking dogs. Maria did the responsible thing. She calculated her mortgage payment. She looked at the interest rate. She budgeted for insurance. She asked about taxes. Her realtor told her what the taxes were at the time. The lender included an estimate. Everything looked manageable. Tight, but manageable. And then home values in her area started rising. Not slowly, not politely, rising like a balloon left in the sun. When values rise, assessments often rise. When assessments rise, property taxes can rise. Maria opened her new bill and her stomach dropped. It was not a small increase. It was a leap, the kind of jump that makes you feel like the ground moved under you. Suddenly, the monthly payment she thought she was signing up for was not the monthly payment she had anymore. It felt like the finish line moved farther away while she stood still. Maria did what most people do first. She complained to friends. Her friends said, "That is normal." She complained to her family. Her family said, "That is life." She complained online, and online, for the first time, she saw something that sounded ridiculous in the best way. People were talking about eliminating property taxes, not reducing, not capping, not freezing for seniors, not delaying, eliminating. Zero. At first she laughed. Then she saw it again. And again. Different state, different headline, same idea. That is where we are right now, where we are. Rising home values have turned property taxes into a surprise punch for a lot of homeowners, especially people on fixed incomes, especially people who bought years ago and planned their retirement around predictable costs, especially families whose income did not rise at the same speed as the market. So pressure is building, and pressure creates movements. But before we jump into the states, we have to anchor this in reality, because property tax is not just a number on a bill. It is a system, and it is one of the most emotionally charged systems we have, because it feels personal. You can ignore a tax you never see. Sales tax is a few extra dollars at checkout. Income tax is withheld before you even touch it. You grumble, but it is distant. Property tax shows up in your mailbox like it owns the place. It is a bill that says, pay this or else, and that or else is not a late fee forever. Or else can become a lien. Or else can become a tax sale. Or else can threaten the very thing you thought you owned. That is why people use blunt language. It can feel like rent. Not rent to a landlord. Rent to the government. Now, to be fair, property tax is also the backbone of local services, the stuff that makes a neighborhood function. When you call 911 and someone shows up, money is behind that. When your street gets repaved, money is behind that. When the local school has teachers, buses, cafeterias, sports programs, special education support, that is money. When storm drains work during a downpour instead of turning your street into a river, that is money too. The basic deal has been simple for a long time. Local communities collect property taxes locally and use them locally. You might not love paying, but you can see where it goes, at least in theory. The controversy is not that services cost money. The controversy is the feeling that the bill is unpredictable, relentless, and disconnected from your ability to pay. If your home value rises, your taxes can rise even if your income does not. So the moral argument becomes emotional fast, and the political argument becomes explosive. So when you hear property taxes to zero, what you are really hearing is a revolt against unpredictability and the feeling of never being done paying. Now let us go state by state, not as a dry list, but as a journey through the different strategies people are trying. Because here is the twist. The headline is the hook. The details are where the truth lives. First stop, Florida. Florida has been one of the loudest places where this idea has been discussed, and if you understand Florida, the emotion behind it makes perfect sense. Florida has a massive retiree population. A lot of people moved there for sunshine, lifestyle, and the promise that their money would stretch further. People imagine a fixed income that stays steady, a paid-off home, and a calm life. A retiree can handle a stable budget. They cannot handle a bill that climbs because the market got excited. So when Florida talks about eliminating property taxes, it is not just politics. It is a message aimed at a huge group of voters who want predictability and relief. But Florida also shows you the first complication people skip right past. Even when politicians say eliminate, the conversation often turns into something like eliminate some parts, keep other parts, or replace specific portions in a way that keeps schools funded. Because schools are the sensitive nerve in this whole debate. Say we are eliminating property taxes, and the immediate reaction is, okay, what about schools? Some of the talk in places like Florida has involved separating the part of your tax bill that supports schools from other parts that support local government services. So you might hear the idea of wiping out non-school portions first, or shifting school funding elsewhere while leaving a smaller local tax. The important thing is this. When people say eliminate, they are not always talking about the exact same thing. Sometimes it is a full reset. Sometimes it is a partial one dressed up in a bold headline. Then comes the question that always follows. If Florida reduces or removes property taxes, where does the money come from? This is where you start hearing replacement ideas. Raise sales tax, increase taxes that fall more on tourists, add fees tied to travel, hotels, rentals, entertainment. And in Florida, that sounds attractive because Florida is a tourist machine. If you can shift part of the cost to visitors, residents cheer. But every solution has a shadow. Sales tax hits everyone who buys things, and it often hits lower-income households harder as a percentage of their income because they spend a larger share of what they earn. Tourist-driven taxes can bring in a lot, but tourism can fluctuate. Storms happen. Economic downturns happen. Travel trends change. Florida is the perfect example of the easiest part of this idea and the hardest part of this idea. The easy part is getting people to love the headline. The hard part is making replacement revenue stable, fair, and enough. Because once you remove a major funding stream, you either cut services, shift costs somewhere else, or invent a new mechanism that the public will accept. Florida is the headline. Florida is also the warning label. Next stop, Illinois. Illinois comes up in property tax conversations constantly because residents have faced extremely high property tax burdens compared to many other states. When taxes are already crushing, frustration is not theoretical. It is monthly. It is the reason people move. It is the reason people sell homes they wanted to keep. It is the reason seniors look at their paid-off house and still feel insecure. Illinois also shows a very different approach, one that feels almost like a story of endurance. Instead of saying everyone gets zero, some of the discussion has looked more like a reward for long-term survival. Think of a homestead-style rule that could eliminate property taxes for homeowners who have lived in their property for a certain number of years, something like 30. Just picture the emotion behind that. You buy a home. You pay for decades. You raise kids. You shovel the driveway through more winters than you can count. You mow the lawn 1,000 times. You replace the roof, you fix the furnace, you pay and pay and pay. Then after you have done your time, the tax stops. That story is powerful. It feels like fairness. And then the fairness fight begins. Because the first-time buyer hears it and says, "So I pay full price while someone else pays nothing." The younger family says, "Why does my clock start later?" The person who moved for a job says, "So my family gets punished for relocating." The idea is compassionate, but it creates a new set of lines. Relief like this always forces a choice about who gets helped first. Seniors who want to age in place. Longtime residents who watch their neighborhood change. Families who are stretched thin right now. New buyers who already feel locked out. Illinois is where those stories collide. And here is the part people do not want to say out loud. Any plan that dramatically reduces property taxes will create winners and losers unless it is universal. Targeted plans feel fair to one group and unfair to another. Universal plans feel fair in principle, but they are harder to fund and more disruptive. So Illinois shows you something important. This debate is not just about math. It is about which story the public thinks matters most. Now we head to Kansas, and Kansas brings a different energy to the conversation. Instead of just cutting taxes and crossing fingers, Kansas has seen ideas that aim to build a long-term engine to fund public services without leaning so heavily on property taxes. Imagine it like this. Most states are in a grocery store problem. They need money for essentials every year. They walk in, pay full price, and hope the bill does not rise too much next time. Kansas-type thinking tries to turn it into a garden problem. Plant something once, nurture it, and let it produce over time. One idea that gets floated in these kinds of discussions is removing certain sales tax exemptions, creating new revenue, and funneling it into a large public fund that is invested. Over time, the fund grows, and the earnings can be used to support big spending areas like education that often lean on property taxes. If that works, it is elegant. It means you are not constantly raising taxes, you are letting a fund do some of the work. But the risk is obvious too. Markets go up and down. Returns are not guaranteed, and even if the fund is managed well, it takes years to reach the size where it can replace a giant revenue source like property taxes. Kansas is the patient approach, not a dramatic switch flip, a long game.
A plan that sounds calm on paper and stressful in real life because patience is hard when people need relief now. If it works, it becomes a model. If it fails, it becomes a cautionary tale about tying essential services to investment performance. Now, let us talk about Ohio. Ohio's angle has been less polished and more raw. It has been driven by homeowners, by grassroots energy, by people who looked at their bills and said, "Enough." This matters because it shows the intensity of the feeling. When people go through the trouble of organizing, gathering signatures, and pushing for structural change, they are not casually annoyed. They feel cornered. They feel like the rules are written against them. And they are not asking for a coupon. They want the system rewritten. Ohio shows the difference between policy talk and movement energy. Policy talk is what happens inside government buildings. Movement energy is what happens when ordinary residents decide they are done waiting for permission. But Ohio also runs into the same unavoidable wall. If property taxes go away, how do you pay for what they currently fund? A movement can put an idea on the ballot. A movement can force politicians to respond. After the cheering, someone still has to do the math. And this is where people get frustrated, because abolishing a tax is a decision. A funding plan is what makes the decision survivable. Ohio represents the anger stage of the national conversation. Anger can move mountains. Anger cannot keep the lights on at the local library by itself. Now we arrive in North Dakota, and this is the state that makes other states jealous because North Dakota has something many states do not: a powerful revenue engine tied to natural resources. In places like North Dakota, there has been talk tied to the idea of using resource-related revenue and investment earnings to offset property taxes over time. That can mean growing a fund, using the earnings, expanding credits, increasing relief year after year until the effective burden starts to shrink dramatically. This is not usually framed as an overnight miracle. It is framed as a path. And it is important because it shows what a real mechanism looks like. Not just a promise, a mechanism, a source of money you can point to, measure, and potentially grow. Now, even here, reality still bites. Commodity revenues can fall. Investment returns can weaken. Costs can rise faster than the fund. But North Dakota illustrates a simple truth. The states that can most realistically chase something close to elimination are the states with an alternative revenue stream that is already huge, whether that is natural resources, a large public investment fund, or some unique economic advantage. Other states can still reduce property taxes. They just cannot pretend the math is the same. Next stop, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's conversation includes the same emotional heartbeat we heard in Florida. The idea that homeowners should have true ownership without feeling like permanent tenants of the state. But Pennsylvania also shows what happens when you have the emotion before you have the replacement plan. A proposal can say, we should eliminate or reduce property taxes, and the public might cheer. Then someone asks, okay, with what money are we replacing it? This is where you start seeing more politically spicy replacement ideas enter the chat, like taxing large university endowments at the wealthiest institutions, or making certain large organizations contribute more. And that opens a whole different fight, because the moment you shift taxes away from homeowners, you have to pick a new target. Sales taxes target consumers, tourism taxes target visitors, income taxes target earners, business taxes target companies, endowment taxes target large institutions. Every replacement method has someone who will feel attacked, and that group will fight back with money, messaging, and influence. So Pennsylvania highlights something that is easy to miss if you only read headlines. Replacing property taxes is not just economics, it is politics. You are moving weight from one group to another. Someone will feel relief. Someone else will feel singled out. That fight can get louder than the original goal. Now we need to talk about the fear under all of this. Because even people who hate property taxes still worry about what happens if they vanish. They worry about schools first. They worry about police and fire. They worry about road maintenance. They worry about libraries and parks. They worry about the invisible services you only notice when they stop working. This is where the conversation has to get honest. Property taxes do not exist because governments were bored and needed something to do. They exist because local services cost money and property has been a stable base to tax. Property does not pack up and leave in the middle of the night. It sits there. People move. Businesses move. Spending changes. Tourism rises and falls. Markets swing. Property stays. That stability is why local governments rely on it. So eliminating property taxes means you have to replace stability with something else, or build a new kind of stability. And depending on what you replace it with, the feeling of your community changes. Let me paint this in real-life terms. Imagine a town where property taxes suddenly drop, but the replacement revenue is shaky. Maybe it depends heavily on retail spending. That means in good years, the town feels fine. In bad years, budgets tighten fast, and budgets tightening fast means choices. Maybe it means fewer after-school programs. Maybe it means postponing road repairs again. Maybe it means longer response times because staffing gets cut. Maybe it means the library closes 2 days a week instead of being open every day. None of those things show up in the headline, but you feel them. On the flip side, imagine a town where property taxes drop and the state steps in to fund schools more directly. That can reduce the gap between wealthy and poor districts, which is a huge argument for reform. But it also shifts control. Local school boards still exist, but the funding is now tied to statewide decisions, statewide politics, and statewide budget battles. In other words, the fight does not disappear. It moves. Then there is the replacement option that sounds simple: raise sales tax. If you do that, homeowners pay less directly for the house, but everyone pays more when they buy things. Renters pay too. Visitors pay too. That can feel fair or unfair depending on your perspective. But there is a hidden twist. Sales taxes tend to hit people differently depending on income, because people with lower incomes spend more of what they earn on essentials. A higher sales tax can be felt like sand in your shoes. It is not one big bill, but it shows up everywhere. Tourism-based taxes can be tempting because they feel like outsiders funding your lifestyle. But if tourism drops after a storm or during a recession, the money drops too. And you do not want your fire department budget depending on whether hotel rooms are booked. Investment fund approaches can work beautifully if managed well over time. They can also disappoint if the timeline is unrealistic or if politics gets in the way. So the services question is not just, will schools still exist? It is who controls them, who funds them, and how stable is the funding. Now let us zoom out and talk about the angles that rarely make the headline, because property taxes to zero is a great headline. Life is not a headline. First, renters. This story is not just about homeowners. Landlords pay property taxes and often bake those costs into rent. When property taxes rise, renters can feel it, even if they never see the bill. It can show up as a rent increase with a vague explanation like, costs are up. So if a state reduces property taxes, renters might benefit through slower rent increases. But that is not guaranteed because rent is also driven by demand, supply, and what the market will tolerate. Still, renters are part of this, and they are often left out of the conversation like they are watching through a window. Let me put a face on that. Meet Jamal. Jamal rents a 2-bedroom apartment. He is not thinking about assessments. He is thinking about groceries, car repairs, and whether his job is stable. One year his landlord raises the rent and tells him it is because taxes went up, insurance went up, everything went up. Jamal hears people cheering about property tax elimination and thinks, maybe that helps me too. Then he wonders, or does it just help the owner and I still pay whatever the market says I pay? That uncertainty is real. Renters can be affected, but they are not in control of whether they actually see savings. Next, first-time buyers. Lower property taxes can make the monthly cost of ownership cheaper, which sounds like it would help first-time buyers. But it can also raise home prices. Why? Because when monthly costs drop, buyers can afford more. When buyers can afford more, sellers often capture that increased affordability through higher prices. So you might end up in a world where the monthly bill feels lighter, but the upfront price climbs. That benefits existing owners. It can hurt new entrants. So first-time buyers are not automatically winners in a property tax reduction world. It depends on how the market reacts. Then there are seniors aging in place. This is one of the strongest arguments for reform, because it is the most heartbreaking version of the story. A senior can have a paid-off home and still be at risk if taxes climb beyond their fixed income. Picture someone who bought a house 30 years ago. Mortgage paid off. Their plan was simple: live quietly, garden, see grandkids, be at peace. Then the neighborhood changes, home prices climb, taxes climb. Suddenly their paid-off home feels like it comes with a subscription fee they cannot afford. That is why many places use exemptions, caps, and relief programs for seniors. Full elimination would be an extreme version of that relief. But even without elimination, you can see why the emotion is so intense. People do not want to be priced out of the place where their life happened. Then there is inequality between districts. Property tax-funded schools can create deep inequality because wealthy areas can raise more money even with lower tax rates. Poorer areas can tax themselves harder and still not raise enough. So if a state shifts education funding away from property taxes and toward statewide funding, it can reduce disparities. But again, it changes control and it creates new battles at the state level. You can fix one problem and spark another. Then there is accountability. When local services are funded locally, residents can see the connection, at least emotionally. They pay. They show up at meetings. They demand results. If funding shifts to the state or to a distant revenue stream, the accountability loop can weaken. People might blame the wrong level of government, or leaders might point fingers at each other, and the average resident is stuck in the middle. Then there is volatility. Sales taxes can fall in recessions. Tourism taxes can fall after disasters. Investment returns can fall in market downturns. If essential services depend on volatile streams, you can end up with budgets that rise and fall with the economy, which is the opposite of what you want for things like emergency response and schools. And then there is the psychological heart of all of it. Ownership is not just financial. It is identity. It is security. It is the feeling that you have a place in the world that cannot be taken away. Property taxes, especially when they rise sharply, can threaten that feeling. That is why people use the phrase rent to the government. Whether that phrase is fair or not, it captures a real feeling of insecurity. And in politics, feelings move faster than spreadsheets. Now let us get practical and talk about what replacement actually looks like, because every time a state flirts with elimination, the story lives or dies here. Sometimes the replacement is sales tax. It is simple to collect. It has a broad base. But it can be regressive and sensitive to economic cycles. Sometimes the replacement leans on visitors. Hotel taxes, rental car taxes, entertainment taxes. It works best in states with heavy tourism. It is also vulnerable when travel drops. Sometimes it is about changing the tax base rather than just raising rates. Removing exemptions, closing carve-outs, broadening what gets taxed so the rate does not have to climb. That is politically difficult because every exemption has a defender, and those defenders can get loud. Sometimes it is about creating a fund, a public investment approach that grows over time and uses earnings to support services. That requires discipline, good governance, and time. It also requires the public to accept that part of their community budget is tied to market performance. Sometimes it is resource revenue, oil, gas, minerals. This works only where the resources exist and the revenue is large enough. It is also tied to commodity swings, which can be brutal. Sometimes it targets concentrated wealth, large institutions, huge endowments, major organizations. That can raise meaningful money in specific states, but it also sparks legal fights, political fights, and public messaging wars. Sometimes it is a shift upward. The state takes on more responsibility for funding schools and local services, reducing reliance on local property taxes. That can reduce inequality between districts, but it increases statewide political conflict. Sometimes it is not elimination at all. It is credits, relief programs, caps on annual increases, and expanded exemptions. A slow walk toward a lighter burden instead of a dramatic zero. Now here's the part I want you to really sit with. Every replacement changes behavior. Raise sales tax and people feel it daily. Raise tourism taxes and industries lobby hard. Tax large institutions and they fight back with influence and arguments about jobs, tuition, and economic impact. Shift funding to income tax and the political heat rises fast because high earners become the focal point and everyone starts arguing about fairness. So when you hear a state proposing elimination, the real story is not the word eliminate. The real story is what they replace it with and who ends up carrying the weight. And that brings us back to Maria. Because Maria does not care about ideology. She cares about whether she can stay in her house without feeling like the floor is moving. When she saw those headlines about elimination, she felt something she had not felt in a while. Hope. Then she started reading the details and realized something. Even if her property taxes dropped, something else might rise. If sales taxes rise, she pays more every time she buys school supplies. If the state shifts school funding, her community might lose some local control. If services get cut, her street might go longer without repairs, and her kids' school might lose programs. If home prices rise because monthly ownership costs drop, her sister who is trying to buy her first home might get pushed even farther away from ownership. So Maria started asking a better question than the first one, not just, can we eliminate property taxes? But, can we build a system that feels stable, fair, and predictable for people who want to live their lives without getting blindsided? That is the real question hiding under every headline. Now let me give you a mental test, because this is where the conversation turns from internet slogans into real life. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and your property taxes are gone. You feel the relief immediately. It is like breathing easier. Then you go buy groceries and notice the total is higher because sales tax rose. Then your friend who works at the school tells you they are cutting staff because the replacement funding did not fully cover the gap. Then you hear the county is delaying road maintenance again. Then you hear home prices jumped because buyers can afford more monthly payment without the tax bill. At that point, how do you feel? Still relieved? Angry again? Confused? Maybe all three. That is why this issue is so messy. Property taxes are hated because they feel personal and relentless. Property taxes are used because they are stable and local. Eliminating them sounds like freedom. Replacing them can create new pain somewhere else. So what does all this mean if you are watching this and wondering, okay, but what should I actually think about this? Here is the most grounded way to look at it. If someone promises elimination, ask what is being eliminated. Is it the whole bill or just part? Is it all property or just primary residences? Is it immediate or phased? Is it for everyone or only certain groups? Then ask the question that matters more than the promise. Where does the money come from? Not a vague answer like, "We will find it." Not a slogan like, "Government should stop wasting money." A real answer. Sales tax, income tax, tourism taxes, state funding, investment fund earnings, resource revenue, or something else. Then ask the question almost nobody asks until it is too late. How stable is that replacement during a recession, during a disaster, during a market downturn, during a slow year for tourism, during a drop in commodity prices? Because your town does not get to pause emergency services during a bad year. Then ask one more question that cuts through a lot of noise. Who wins and who loses? Homeowners, renters, first-time buyers, seniors, high earners, low earners, large institutions, small businesses. If a plan does not admit its winners and losers, it is not honest yet. Now, I want to end this section with a story that shows why this debate is not going away. There is a couple, I will call them Dave and Ellen. They bought their house decades ago. It was their dream, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. They raised their kids there. They marked heights on the doorway. They hosted holidays. They thought they were set. Then their area boomed. Home values went up. New construction arrived. Trendy shops opened. People started calling it an up-and-coming neighborhood. Dave and Ellen should have felt lucky. Instead, they felt hunted by their own zip code. Because the tax bill rose year after year until it became the biggest source of stress in their lives. Not because they made bad choices, but because the world around them changed. Their home was paid off, but it did not feel secure. That story is happening everywhere. And that is why the idea of eliminating property taxes has heat behind it. Not because everyone thinks it is the perfect policy, but because people are desperate for a system that does not punish them for staying put. So here is what comes next in this national conversation. More states will flirt with bold language because bold language gets attention. More people will rally around the idea because the pain is real. More leaders will propose partial solutions because full elimination is financially hard. And more communities will wrestle with the same tension. Relief versus services, predictability versus flexibility, local control versus statewide funding, short-term happiness versus long-term stability. If you are a homeowner, your next step is not just to hope for a headline. Your next step is to understand how your state funds schools and local services right now, what portion of your property tax bill goes where, and what kind of replacement your state would realistically consider. If you are a renter, your next step is to pay attention anyway, because property taxes can show up in your rent, and replacement taxes like sales tax can hit you directly. If you are a first-time buyer, your next step is to watch for second-order effects, because lower monthly cost can turn into higher purchase prices. If you are a retiree or planning to be one, your next step is to look closely at senior exemptions, caps, and relief programs in your area, because those can protect you even if elimination never happens. And if you are someone who just wants the rules to feel fair, your next step is to stop accepting simple slogans from either side and demand the real plan. Because eliminating property taxes is easy to chant. Replacing them without breaking the things we rely on is the hard work. And that hard work is where the real story will be written. Now, in the next part, we are going to zoom in even closer on what happens to your daily life under different replacement models. And I am going to walk you through a few realistic scenarios so you can picture how this would actually feel, not just how it sounds. Because the decision is not just about taxes. It is about how your community functions, who gets protected, and who gets squeezed. And once you see it that way, you will never read those property taxes to zero headlines the same way again.